Here in the paddock at Silverstone, the early race goers are wandering round to see what the various teams have brought along for this meeting, the first to be held for the new Intercontinental Formula. It is a wide international field with Cooper Maseratis from Centro-Sud of Italy, BRM, Lotus, and Cooper of England are here, all using last year's Formula One cars. Scarab team from America, sponsored by the Woolworth heir apparent Lance Reventler, their first appearance in England, and everyone wanted to see what the American idea of a Grand Prix car was like. This is Moss's Lotus, which he is driving in the first race, a sports car event.
There's a little bit of creep in the back row, there's the Hobbs there. And a down the lane, still a bit of that stop. There's Cliff Addison, and Jimmy Blue going up on the outside with him. Salvadori, and as they go...
As the cars dive into Copse Corner, the mechanics scurry back to their pits and wait for the cars to come round on their first lap. Allison in the UDT Laystal Lotus was first round Woodcote Corner, followed by Moss and Salvadori, but on the second lap Sterling, who had made fastest lap in practice by a clear 4 seconds, took the lead, and from then on proceeded to give the lap record a beating, finally leaving it at over 106 miles an hour. David Hobbs, driving the Red Lotus Elite, was really throwing the car about. This car was fitted with the Hobbs automatic transmission, and had been entered to see how this very incongruous mixture would work. It later came into the pits with ignition trouble, but the gearbox itself proved very reliable. Moss comes round for the 25th and last time, having resisted a very strong challenge from Salvadori, to win the race at an average speed of over 102 miles an hour. And as Moss drives into the paddock after the race, the drivers in the next race for Formula Junior cars pull out onto the circuit to do a warming up lap. Marshals assemble them in the starting area. On the starter's rostrum, Kenneth Evans, pre-war racing driver, drops the flag, and nearly 3,000 brake horsepower is let loose as over 30 drivers try to get into Copse Corner first. Arundel of Team Lotus took the lead at the start, but didn't keep it for long, as Russell and South African Tony Maggs took it in turn to lead. Out of this dogfight, Russell, a former exponent of 500cc racing, established a good lead for himself, while behind him the battle raged for a place on the leaderboard. Humes Cooper retires into the paddock. Formula Junior has acquired for itself a rather doubtful name because of the cut and thrust tactics employed by some of the drivers, which savours rather of speedway. But today they behaved themselves and no one was carved up. At the end of the 75-mile race, which was won by Russell, the drivers come into the paddock area and the placed cars are driven to the scrutineers' bay to be checked that they have complied with the regulations governing weight and engine size, etc. The centre of interest in the production car race was number 37, the Chevrolet Impala, flown specially from America by Dan Gurney. There Bruce McLaren walks over to his Jaguar. For many years now the Jaguars have won this race, but this year the Impala has lapped in practice faster than the Jaguars, and Lofty England, the racing manager of Jaguars, is reported to have bitten his fingernails down to his elbows. When the flag dropped, the Impala hung back on initial acceleration, but its 360 brake horsepower took hold as it reached Copse Corner, and thereafter the Jaguar drivers were struggling, Salvadori lying second and Graham Hill third. Behind this combat of the Titans, the minnows were having their usual wheel-to-wheel battles, with the BMC minis providing the crowd with their usual display of impossibly fast cornering. Salvadori's boot lid popped open, and he was black flagged to come into his pit and have it closed. The reason being, of course, that he couldn't see if anyone were trying to overtake with the lid flapping up and down. Salvadori, no doubt in a pretty savage state, pulls into his pit for his mechanic to fix the boot lid, and Graham Hill is left to take up the pursuit of the Impala, which was cornering very steadily. Although there were signs that the brake department was getting a bit hot and bothered, as the brake lights came on earlier and earlier each time it went into Copse Corner. However, no race is won until the leader gets the checkered flag, and over at Abbey Curve, on the last lap, the Impala's near side rear wheel detached itself and the car slewed to a halt, and Graham Hill was suitably delighted to have the race handed to him on a plate, and Lofty England smiled again. We are now coming to the main race of the day, that for the Intercontinental Formula cars. This formula has been introduced primarily at the request of the English and American teams to produce what the drivers call real racing. The new Grand Prix formula for 1.5 litre cars is unpopular with them. They say it's too slow. This is the new van wall built especially for the new formula and using an engine of the maximum size allowed, 3 litres. The Cooper Maseratis of Centro Sud used the 2.5 litre engine designed for the previous Formula 1 but brought out to 2,700cc. Cooper being warned upon the jack is the Rob Walker entry, prepared by Alf Francis and being driven today by Sterling Moss. Tony Brooks, the man with 3 strings to his bow, garage proprietor, dentist and professional racing driver, is to drive one of the 2 BRMs. There the Van Wall's head mechanic takes his very valuable charge away to the starting area, all ready for John Surtees to play with. Now, with only minutes to go before the race begins, rain is falling, and as the hard plugs are fitted, the drivers are no doubt thinking they'll be earning their money today.
Number 2, 9 position engine going, with the narrow road extremely well in practice.
John Eason Gibson, secretary of the BRDC, warns the drivers that the circuit is in a very treacherous condition, with oil, rubber and pools of water already forming on the corners.
Okay, fuel injection, 5 seconds to go. A little bit of greasing by Danny Brooks.
As they splash their way under the motor bridge, Brabham is leading, with McLaren, Moss and Surtees and the Van Wall in his wake. At the end of the first lap, the order is the same, but amongst the rest of the field there are many who have had their moments. The Teely of Centro Sud overturned his Cooper at Club Corner, and Brooks, Ireland and Jimmy Clark all spun off together at Abbey Curve. Day, who was lying 7th, takes the Scarab very steadily round Woodcote. This was the only front-engine car in the race. In the opening laps, drivers were reported to be cross-country motoring in large numbers. Most of them managed to push their cars back onto the road and restart, but Bruce McLaren was not so fortunate as he pirouetted on Woodcote Corner and finished up in the earth bank. The car's very badly bent, but Bruce climbs out and is none the worse. He walks back to the pits to applause from the stands. I hope it gave him confidence to face Tommy Atkins, the owner of the Cooper, he left lying in a little pile by the roadside. Salvadori treats Woodcote with deserving care. Taylor was another who found Woodcote Corner more like a skating rink and waltzed merrily backwards onto the grass verge in his JBW Maserati. The marshals push it out of the way, in case anyone else follows in his path. Now Surtees, who had been lying 3rd, pulls into his pit. At Abbey Curve he left the road, collecting large lumps of scenery in his air intake. He had this dug out by the mechanics and went on his way, scarcely rejoicing, because the conditions were nothing short of foul. There's Naylor pleading with the marshals to let him restart. Now Moss is right on Brabham's tail, and obviously he is about to make his attack. Next lap, he rounds Woodcote in the lead, with Brabham trying desperately to hang on. Just how desperately you can see from this slide. You watch it, Brabham's rear wheels as he nearly loses it right in front of the grandstands. But Moss sails on, clearly master of the treacherous conditions. JBW stands forlornly on the grass verge, Naylor having given up trying to persuade the marshals to let him restart. Too dangerous, they say, with other cars drifting wide onto the grass. At 40 laps, half distance, the rain had nearly stopped, and with more experience of the conditions there were fewer incidents. Moss continued his fantastically fast way, looking for all the world as though his car ran on rails denied to the other drivers. On lap 54, Moss lapped Brabham and the rain started again. Brabham seemed content to lie second. He had to fly to America straight after the race to qualify for the Indianapolis 500-mile race. And so the race ran out its 80 very wet laps, and after 240 miles of some of the worst weather conditions imaginable, Moss took the checkered flag to record his first victory in the Intercontinental Formula. Brabham dives for his pit after crossing the line, parks his car and dashes off to a waiting police car in the paddock. The grandstand crowd shout their best wishes for success at Indianapolis. He was whisked off to London Airport whence he flew to New York. A racing driver's life is certainly a hectic one. And so as the crowds make for home with the rain still beating down, they can congratulate themselves on having seen a day of magnificent racing, no lack of variety amongst the cars taking part, and above all, a demonstration by Stirling Moss of absolute mastery over weather conditions of which many said this is the end.